When Steel talks, everybody listens.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage our opening keynote, Robert De Niro.
Come on, come through.
Thank you for the surprising honor of giving a few remarks for the NAB show Keynote. My message today is that it's time to put social responsibility in front of making a profit. I was just fucking with you. Okay, let's take a big break. Now that everybody's awake, I'm just going to make a few comments and then join in the discussion with Dade. We'll be out of here before the bars open, I promise. I do want to briefly speak about a subject we all agree on. It's a right that's at the essence of what you do. It's also a right that has come under threat from the very people we depend on to protect it. I'm speaking of the First Amendment guarantee of a free press. The First Amendment is my favorite amendment, and not just because I stopped reading the amendments after the wildly misinterpreted Second Amendment. Don't get me started on that. We're the NAB. I'll save that rant for the NRA. I admire the NAB for petitioning Congress to protect the rights of journalists. But isn't it odd that we still need to do this? I thought it was settled 227 years ago when the Bill of Rights was ratified. What's become of my favorite amendment since then? Today it's difficult for the First Amendment to protect journalists when the president calls the news media enemies of the people and disgusting, and labels any criticism or inconvenient facts as fake news. Today, there are forces weaponizing the First Amendment to give unlimited campaign financing to corporations, to protect false and misleading advertising, and to promote bad science for political ends. Today, even journalists' lives are in danger. The week before last, a Washington Post columnist was brutally murdered in the Saudi embassy, while our government insists on continuing to sell them billions of dollars in arms. These are the plots of bad movies, and I should know I've made my share of bad movies. But a bad movie is out of the theaters in a week. Bad government doesn't go away. It metastasizes. A free press helps keep us honest by reporting on the facts. That's why the Founding Fathers thought it important enough to put it right there at the top, before right to a trial and before cruel and unusual punishment. But when our government disparages facts and demonizes the media, the result literally is getting away with murder. These truths used to be self-evident, but not so much now. Truth, facts, reality have become political tools to be used for political purposes. Tip O'Neill famously said, "All politics is local." I agree, up to a point. Conditions today demand to also have representation and strength on a national basis, and that's where the NAB comes in. I'm very happy to be with you today. And now I'm going to be joined by author, journalist, editor, Dade, who will quiz me on the NAB's 115th Congress, Broadcasters Policy Agenda, and other fun subjects. Dade.
Hello. So glad that you could all join us. Thank you so much for the remarks this morning. I want to stay on the theme that you were talking about. I mean, a lot of these American values, I think, were up for grabs, and we were all thinking about them in the moments and the days and the weeks and the months after September 11th. And your legacy, and we'll get to some of the work you've done and what you're up to in the entertainment business, but I think Tribeca and the Tribeca Film Festival, Tribeca Enterprises, is really a cornerstone for you. I wondered if you could kind of go back to how it started, because it does sort of connect, I think, with what you were just talking about.
Well, I mean, do you mind if I sit there? I don't know.
Absolutely. Whatever you
just
want.
feel better here.
Oh yeah, this is perfectly nice. They're fuzzy.
Yeah, nice. Well, we had thought about, Jane and I had thought about doing a festival before, but not really very seriously. But once 9/11 happened, we said, let's really try and do it. We did it in 120 days, and it was, it just felt right to do at the time for Lower Manhattan, Tribeca, the area, and so on.
But, you know, a film festival is a tough thing to pull off.
It is.
You had to, basically, were you calling in, not favors, but were you sort of tapping into your roots in the neighborhood and kind of getting people to get on board?
Yeah, I mean, we called people we knew, worked with, people we didn't know, everyone, just to get it up and running, and the feeling was great. Everyone was willing to help. Everybody jumped on board. It was that was not a problem at all. So it was kind of, I'd say, by the seat of the pants, if you will. But it worked out. We had no idea that it would do as nicely as it is today, and as part of the fabric of the city, which I've always hoped it would be. So that's great.
I mean, in those early moments, it really was about getting up off the mat. Like,
yes, yeah.
And so instead of we think of Tribeca now with the Vanity Fair party, or, you know, a lot of really sort of glitzy, glamorous parties, as well as, you know, interesting films. But in those early, in that first edition of the festival, there really wasn't like an opening party, or it wasn't a party moment, right? You were having restaurants.
Well, there were parties, but they're parties because people celebrate their movies being made. They weren't like glitzy Hollywood parties. The Vanity Fair party was on for a while, then it sort of, for budget reasons, we brought it down. It was nice. It was kind of great, and not that big a deal, but it was nice. And then we had to let that go too. But yeah, it's not as glitzy as you would think.
So you had an interesting conversation with Alec Baldwin on ABC. I enjoyed that quite a bit. If you haven't seen that, you should definitely check it out. And I was interested in your response. You know, he's a New Yorker, you're a New Yorker, and he was talking to you about the city, because you've obviously been a real engine of revival of the city. And he was asking you, his feeling was maybe it's changed, not always for the better. And you were a little more sanguine. You sort of felt like change is what it is. And I mean, do you kind of look around at Lower Manhattan particularly, or the rest of the city, and marvel at how much it's changed?
Yeah, I mean, I people always say, well, it was like this in those days, and where are those days now, blah, blah, blah. And I just say, look, that was then, now is now. We have to deal with the present and move forward. It makes no sense to bemoan the past, if you will. I never felt the past was it was okay.
Yeah.
Certain things. But now is better, because now is now. And we have to do things that are important for now.
Yeah. So production in New York is really booming.
Yes.
The statistics show, whether it's television or film, you know, there's been so many different factors that have led to this real boom time. So you've shot films all over. You do a lot of work in New York, obviously, but over your career, even a signature film like Mean Streets, you know, you tend to think of that as the ultimate, you know, New York City movie. But there were key scenes that were shot in LA. So I bring that up only to ask you, what the subtleties are that you get on screen. What comes out in the final product that is significant when you shoot here in New York?
Well, shooting in New York, for me, it's because it's home, so it's nicer always. But we shot Mean Streets for, I think it was either, 2 weeks in New York and 3 in LA, or the other way. 3 weeks in New York and 2 in LA. But the things that we did in LA were interiors and stuff that you could get away. Some exteriors, and the last part of the movie is in downtown LA. But, you know, that's what happens. It always boils down to money, and it was cheaper to do it, be able to shoot that part of it, as long as it can be done believably, and that's done all the time in movies. You know, so
yeah. Are there any aspects of shooting here or working here that you would want to change? You know, if you could change anything about just, you know, working in the city, living in the city. We all want. Well,
I want to change certain things, but that's too big, and it was only a dream. At one point, we wanted to do Jane. I had an idea about getting the Brooklyn Navy Yard and making it a kind of a cultural place and studios and for people to see how movies are being done and other parts of the city. Everything connected to New York and even New York State. But it was that time. It just became. It wasn't. Just didn't happen. But that was my dream.
Yeah. Well, there's still time.
Well,
still some real estate over.
Yeah.
So I asked you about Mean Streets, but I do want to kind of go back through some of your work, because I think a lot of people here would love to get you to kind of reflect a little bit on that, if you would. So one signature role certainly is in Godfather Part 2. And I was really struck by an interview that you gave a few years ago to James Lipton, where you talked about preparing for the role of Vito Corleone, and you're playing him as a younger man. There's only, I think, 3 lines in English, most of it's in Italian. And already you were following an Oscar-winning performance by Marlon Brando. You're the only 2 who have won Oscars for playing the same role. So, but I was surprised to hear that you studied his performance very, very closely. Sometimes there's superstition around that. You know, you don't want to necessarily study it, but you were really deliberately trying to kind of
I had to.
Yeah. So talk a bit about your approach there.
Well, what we did was one of the producers, Gray Fredrickson, and I took an old Sony tape recorder, reel-to-reel, up to the 38th floor or whatever it is in the Gulf and Western building at that time, which is now the Trump Hotel. But at that time,
we'll get to that later.
Yeah. But anyway, it was there, and we just shot all of Brando's scenes, or ran the movie, and when Brando's scenes came up, we just filmed them. We just videotaped them, and then I would use those and study them over and over again. So that was one thing that I did.
And you must have been kind of a fan of his work. I mean, I'm curious about your relationship to his work long before you ever were in the business.
Brando, James Dean, Montgomery Clift, 1 or 2 other actors. Yeah, those are my favorites.
Yeah. And how's your Italian?
It's okay.
You had to really.
Well, that was Sicilian, but a little Italian mixed in. But yeah, it was okay. I tried my best.
You spent a few weeks in...
Yes, I was in Sicily for like 3 weeks.
And so you talked about some of the actors you admired. Were there any particular films or plays or novels, works of art? You grew up in an artistic household, obviously, but were there works that inspired you that you can kind of go back and say, aha, you know, when I was X years old, I saw that film?
When I was a kid, I'd see the movies that kids at that age, most kids see in the Loews Theater, or the double bill of Ben-Hur. Something Last Summer was one that was a little more artistic. Tennessee Williams, but Elizabeth Taylor. No, was she in it? No, that was Anna Magnani, I think, and I forget who. Maybe I'm mixing them up. But it was more big mainstream type films that I would see. Well, The Searchers, John Wayne, anyway, those kind of films that that influenced me or made an impression on me.
Yeah. I'm curious about comedy, because comedy, when I told my 11-year-old son I was doing this conversation, he said, oh yeah, the guy from Meet the Parents. You know? So there's a whole generation, I know, I'm working on him, don't worry, but there is an entire phase of your career that you've flourished in comedy. And you've had roles over the years that have had elements of, you know, Rupert Pupkin, you know, that's a very dark comedy, but there's, you know, you clearly are approaching comedy from a place where you can kind of put it over. But I'm just curious your experience of actually doing it. Why has it been a
Well, with I mean, the comedy stuff on a more mainstream way, because I did stuff that was comedy, I guess you could call it in some ways, the Brian De Palma films in the mid-'60s. But Billy Crystal had this idea about analyze this, and then had the script sent to me, and I read. I said, this is kind of interesting. It'd be fun to kind of make fun of all that stuff, and so that's how that started. And then after that, I met Jay Roach, and we did Meet the Parents, those 3 films.
But it really is something that you've embraced with Saturday Night Live and with so.
I like comedy. I love comedians. I think that they're great, and I get a big kick out. I love Saturday Night Live. And I always, when I look at a movie, I always say, I wonder how they're going to do this on Saturday Night Live. And they're great. And
I mean, do you see it as like the yin and the yang? I mean, the dramatic roles, you have to have the commitment. The commitment is there.
Well, there's also funny situations or ironic situations that come out of real interactions with people. I like that too, where real characters get into funny situations, but they're real.
Yeah.
And you can find that with the characters in Analyze This. You can find with Goodfellas, Mean Streets. There's certain things that are just funny but real.
Yeah. So you mentioned some of the actors who inspired you, and you studied with Stella Adler.
Yes.
And kind of carried that tradition forward. Do you see a lot of work today that you think extends that? Do you feel like it's still alive and well, or is it sort of more of a 20th century phenomenon?
Well, I don't know. It's different these days, but I mean, the thing about Stella Adler that she taught at that time was a thing called script analysis, where you started by looking at photographs and just taking out of that photograph, a real photograph, and pulling out the stuff that was real. Don't fictionalize, as I think I remember her saying it. It's real. That's pick out those real things. The same thing you do with a script. And most likely, you know, we would not work on movie scripts. We'd work on good theater material. So that was the advantage in a way. So that I've not seen much of, but I don't know. I'm not qualified to say who does that today, but I know she was great.
Yeah.
That was one thing that Stella Adler did that was great for me. To give you and also to give you a sense of where your character is related, where it stands, he or she stands in the world. What the relationship of that character, as small and as intimate as a scene or this or that could be done, how that impacts, or not even impact, what it reflects about the world, and that gives it the size. That kind of stuff, I think, that I've always been aware of. So when you're doing something, you say, well, this is something, it's small, but it has a lot of relevance to what's going on in certain areas of the world, certain people, certain situations.
So it's been interesting to see you connect over the last several years with kind of another generation of talent. David O. Russell is a director and writer that you've had very successful collaborations with. Bradley Cooper.
Yes.
And what is it about them? I mean, is it just been an organic thing? What do you see in their work, or what do they bring out in you?
I'm glad they like me. So no, but we have things that we've worked together on. We want to do other things together, and I'm very happy about that.
Well, we have to talk about
because they're genuine, not only just genuine collaborators, but friends. We become friends.
Yeah. And the festival, in some ways, has acted as a connective tissue.
Yes.
For the community.
Yeah.
You've built a real community.
Yeah.
Well, that does lead us to your current projects. I do want to ask you about a couple of them because they're very significant, I think. You're teaming up again with Martin Scorsese, your 9th collaboration, which is amazing. A film called The Irishman.
Right.
First,
it's called The Irishman, but it's also based on a book called I Heard You Paint Houses by Charles Brand, and it's that title is going to be kept.
Okay.
At this point.
Oh, God.
But everybody titled it The Irishman, which is a good title.
Yeah.
But Heard You Paint Houses is a more interesting title and more connected to them.
And this is going to come out in about a year's time.
On
Netflix.
Yes.
So I'm curious about, obviously there's a story of the project itself and your interactions with the director and your fellow cast members. But I do want to ask you about Netflix, which I know a lot of people here are sort of curious about. They're at an interesting phase. They're making tons of movies, really good movies, but it's caused a bit of consternation, at festivals, in certain cultures around the world, or even in the in Hollywood, in the entertainment community. What's your experience been so far with them?
It's been very good, and they've a movie like Paint Houses or Irishman would not have been done in the way it needed to be done if it wasn't for Netflix, because we needed the money to do it. It's a very ambitious project. There are scenes and sections of the movie, periods, where they're making me look younger than I am today, for earlier 20, 30 years, earlier 40 years, maybe 40 years earlier. So that takes a lot of time, money to get it right. And they're trying to make it as good state-of-the-art as it can be. And it takes longer to get that done because when Marty will pick a scene and edit it, then he's got to send it to them to take those shots and make us look younger. And I'm happy because that'll extend my career another 30 years, hopefully.
And just kind of a quick recap of the log line of the film, just so we're all remembering it. Like, who do you play? I
play a guy named Frank Sheeran, who was a teamster, and he was close to Jimmy Hoffa, and another guy named Russell Buffalino was a mafia guy from New York, upstate, and the relationship between those three. And Joe Pesci plays that character, Pacino plays Jimmy Hoffa, and I play Frank Sheeran. And it's the relationship, what goes on, and I don't know what else I should say. I don't give it away, or everybody knows.
No, don't give it away. Don't give it away. And the stress has been with Netflix that, if it comes on the service, people won't go out to the theaters. There are a lot of major movie circuits that won't play any Netflix films. They're right now kind of sorting all that out. But do you expect there would be a theatrical life?
There has to be, yeah. With this movie, you have to do it. And I think they just have to find a way, if not already, on how to release it theatrically, and then at one point it goes out the other way. Right. I mean, that's the fair way to do it, especially movies that I've done and been associated with, especially with Marty and some of the other films I've done. You need that kind of presentation, if you will, I think it helps. It's the way it should be presented, the way the film should be presented.
So the other project I want to ask you about is The Joker. Todd Phillips' new take on the DC villain.
Right.
A couple weeks ago, right here where we were sitting, it was New York Comic Con, and I don't know if you ever dipped into that world, but it's really something else. And this is going to be something interesting for you to be in the comic book realm.
Yes.
So I'm curious, and actually,
sort of, not really.
And we're not going to talk Rocky and Bullwinkle.
About what?
We don't have to talk about Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah. We're going to skip over that. Let me actually.
I tried my best.
And let me make sure that I set this up because so you play a talk show host who pushes Joaquin Phoenix's character Arthur Fleck to assume his new identity as the Joker.
Is that what they say?
That's the description. This is from the studio.
Yes.
Not some blog.
I push him to help assume his new identity.
Yeah.
Okay.
So. Oh, I'm filling you in.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. But I mean, what interests you? You had to have said yes based on something. So was it just the mix of the? I mean, Joaquin Phoenix is a terrific actor.
I did because of Todd Phillips. Bradley Cooper's worked with him, and they're friends, and he swears by him, and I liked him. I met him. Joaquin was a wonderful actor, very, very special actor, and so that's great. And they wanted me to do it, and I like the part I'm playing, and I part of it's also the connection because of the movies that I've done. Sort of brings it into that because it has it's connected in some way. You'll see when you see the movie, but with the King of Comedy, say, and so on. So.
I did think about it.
Yeah, so that's it's a little different ending, but you'll see.
Yeah, we'll definitely be intrigued to see that. Well, this is the NAB show. And for the broadcast community, October, what is this, the 17th? We're right on the, we're in this window leading up to Election Day. And some of your remarks earlier kind of highlighted the importance of participating. So I kind of didn't want to leave the stage without, I guess, getting a thought or two from you about just, this is sort of a moment unlike any that we've seen, and why? I mean, what are you doing in terms of encouraging people to get out?
Well, I mean, everybody really has to register and vote. I mean, I tell my kids, they're in their early 20s, some of my kids, and I tell them get out and vote, and I make sure that they go. It's very, very important to vote. Of course, I'd like you to vote for but I think you all know what I'd like you to vote for. But, even if you vote for what I don't like, just get out and vote. It's very, very important. It's essential. I think we're in a crisis in this country. A moral crisis, it's just, we're in a bad situation.
And do you feel like, you mentioned the really dire circumstances in terms of preserving the role of journalism.
Yes.
I know you're a news junkie. I mean, that also is an interesting element.
Yeah, well, look what just happened. I mean, that's beyond allowing that to be glossed over is going to bring us to a whole other level worldwide with that kind of situation. It's not. I hope that the people who are supposed to represent us, and so far they've not been doing a very good job, will at least say, look, we've had enough. We have to take a stand on this, period. We must take a stand on it. It's just, you can't allow it. Can't allow it.
And you've said also recently that it's more time for practical strategy and, battleground states. We have so many races that are important. I mean, did you watch the Texas debate? That was interesting.
Beto O'Rourke, I like. I hope he wins. I don't know what's going to happen. Polls are like this. They could be accurate. They could not. I don't know. It's just and the most absurd thing is someone like Trump will say, if it's such a tactic, such a low tactic. If they lose, you're voting against me. I mean, to say that kind of stuff, there are no rules with this guy. There's no decorum. There's nothing. It's nothing. It's terrible.
Did you have moments? You've obviously had a public platform, since 2016 around this, as well as earlier than that. But going back, much further. I mean, were you this provoked, let's say, during Watergate or during? I'm just curious to go back in those days. Like, how did you relate?
During Watergate, I was following it. I was young. I was in my early 30s. I was thinking about other things. I was saying, well, they'll take care of it somehow. I wasn't. And I know people feel the same way about what's going on now. But as I'm older now and see that bad things can really happen if you let them, or if you're not there to prevent them when they're coming our way, it's not good. And I'm not that political, really. I just see such a horrible situation in front of us, and it happens incrementally. It's insidious. It just happens, keeps going more and more until you turn around and you see, wait a minute, how did this happen? That's the real fear. It's insidious. I mean, not to compare us to Germany, but there are similarities. And I was watching some TV show the other day, and they had a speech that was made by Trump, and then they read something from 1984 with Orwell, and it was described the same way, what that speech was and what was written by Orwell in 1984.
I feel like it's a bleak way to end this conversation,
Yeah.
but I'm going to have
Got to get out there and vote.
But yeah, that's actually the key point. Participation is the only way, no matter what perspective you're coming from.
That's it.
Participation. Well, we want to thank you so much for being here.